If there were a conservatory in hell, and if one of its students was to compose a symphony based on the story of the 7 plagues of Egypt, and if he had written one similar to Rachmaninoff's, he would have accomplished his task. Was Rachmaninoff's first symphony really that bad? That scathing review and others like it pushed the 24-year-old Sergei Rachmaninoff into a 3-year depression that left him in a state of creative paralysis.
Rachmaninoff, I think, was like all artists, a very sensitive person. And I think the disaster that happened after his first symphony, that it was so badly received by the critics and by everybody, was really, it almost killed him, in fact. I mean, he could have never recovered from it.
There's a book I have at home of criticisms of first performances, and there are hundreds in there, of criticisms that destroyed works that are now looked upon as some of the greatest masterpieces we have.
See, I don't believe a critic can actually crush someone. If you're in the business, if you're in any business, you have to have enough conviction to go on. And if you get a bad review, my God, if thinking of a composer, you are in great company. Because what great composer from, let's say, from Beethoven, has not had scathing reviews?
If you have a lousy piece and somebody gives it a great review, it's not going to last. As if somebody writes a lousy review on a great piece, the piece is going to last. The review is irrelevant. So Beethoven Fifth got lousy reviews. Concerto for Orchestra, Bartok, and so on. So what? I got lousy reviews. I'm still here. So did many other people. It's not the critics. The critics don't make the music. The critics don't make the wheel go around. It's the notes that these people write and will keep writing.
Thankfully for classical music, Rachmaninoff survived, and his critics didn't. He survived through hypnosis therapy administered by Dr. Nikolai Dahl, a noted Russian psychiatrist and keen amateur musician.
He did go into what was at that time a fairly advanced kind of treatment of psychotherapy to try to get himself out of it, and succeeded, and in fact relaunched his career. And he had the good fortune that was traditional in music of being able to perform his own music.
After his recovery, Rachmaninoff wrote several pieces, but most importantly, he began composing his most enduring work, the C minor Piano Concerto No. 2, which he dedicated to the good Dr. Dahl.
Rachmaninoff was another of those composers who began rather well off in terms of his parents. They had money, the landed gentry and so on, and he started as a conservatory student who was regarded as having a lot of promise. So I think you could say that he was launched, if not with a silver spoon in his mouth, certainly with food. And the trouble was that he was also infected with what that Russian quality is known as depression. I've often thought that Russians are only truly happy when they're sad. Someone once described him as 6 feet 6 inches of gloom. And I don't think any composer has ever looked sadder than Rachmaninoff.
Sergei Rachmaninoff, one of the greatest piano virtuosos of the 20th century, was born in Semyonovo, Russia on April 1st, 1873. In spite of his dour expressions, he was known to have a great sense of humor, which he shared with family and friends. He was elegant, social, well-educated, aristocratic, and enjoyed the finer things that life had to offer. He was physically strong and had really big hands.
Rachmaninoff had hands the size of hams, somebody described it once. I mean, they were so big, you know, and the things that the rest of us are sort of stretching to reach. I can reach the opening of the second concerto, no problem, but I know people who can't even do that. But he could do it, you know, so easily, it's just disgraceful.
Pianists, great pianists, come with all sizes of hands. Thin, fat, long, short. The fact that Rachmaninoff had large hands certainly helped him, but you can't say that's the reason he was a great pianist. He was a great pianist, you know, and as a result, you know, he could take advantage of his hands.
But not many people do have hands like Rachmaninoff's. And so, especially the third concerto, Rach 3, as we in the post-Helfgott era refer to it, is a real challenge, a real challenge.
Third concerto, amongst musicians, was always looked upon with extraordinary respect and reverence. And anybody who could play it was also looked upon the same way. There's no doubt about that Shine did a tremendous amount to the third concerto, and I'm not going to complain about it. I mean, anything that makes classical music more popular, I agree with, because I think people tend to think about classical music as in capital letters and inverted commas, and as something elitist, and that's dreadful.
Rachmaninoff premiered his third concerto in New York on his first American tour in 1909. The American audiences loved him, but he hated the endless traveling and the countless performances and declined any further American contracts. He would return to America for good in 1918, leaving behind a Russia that was now run by communists. He and his family landed in New York, where Rachmaninoff quickly found an agent and gratefully accepted a gift of a piano from the Steinway Company.
Rachmaninoff was not interested technically in the piano, just in results. Well, the Steinway piano, to start off with, adapted several ideas that other people had thought of ahead, such as the iron frame was made prior to Steinway's arrival, and the idea of stringing one set of strings across the other was used, but Steinway adapted these two ideas and put them together with a few wrinkles of their own, such as the way the strings are laid out and a downward projecting flange on the plate that were brand new that created what became known as the Steinway system. The regulation of the action of the hammers, which is what really separates the men from the boys on piano making. And that's where the Steinway excels. You cannot study music without reference to the piano keyboard. You find most of the great conductors are pianists. That's the way they study scores, whether they're good pianists or not. The piano is just a basic tool in the music industry. You can't get along without it. From whether it's Billy Joel or Harry Connick Jr. or Emanuel Axe, the piano is it.
I think for me, Steinways are the piano I feel most comfortable with. I've always played on them. I feel very good about them. I think they're wonderful instruments.
Hollywood borrowed him by the yard, and that became a very strong influence. Warner Brothers Studios, Max Steiner, people like that, great debt to Rachmaninoff. Because of it was impossible to write a love scene and not be aware of the way that he could reach the heart with those long, yearning melodies of his. So he became copied and copied. And the pity is that his own music was devalued in the process.
Rachmaninoff's skill with variations, repeating the same theme but with a slightly different twist on it, was one of his greatest gifts. Rachmaninoff could take a piece of music, turn it inside out, and make it sound completely different, but still sort of the same. Now that's a catchy melody. Let's see what Rachmaninoff did with it. First, let's change it from minor to major. Let's move it from A major to C sharp major. Now let's turn it upside down. Let's slow it down. And now, listen to that melody with Rachmaninoff's signature harmonies underneath. See what I mean? It's very different, but you can see where it came from. Rachmaninoff's other great talent was the climactic drive he infused in his music.
It's true that in Rachmaninoff's music there's a lot of climaxes. I mean, especially if you compare it to Ravel's music, for example, where there are hardly any climaxes. So I think really the trick with that and the idea is that I think you have to look in the score for the climax, the biggest one. It's like this automatically, like in everything in life, there is one climax that will be bigger than the others. So I think you have to kind of build up all the other climaxes to come to this one, which is really the big climax. And I think then from there you can really construct the architecture of the entire piece.
Rocky, as we affectionately call him in classical music circles, was full of surprises. Who would have imagined that behind that stoic, lined face lurked one of classical music's first pop stars? He became so popular that even his first symphony was sounding better than it had before.
Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to a composer is to become popular, because people suddenly think it must mean cheap. And Rachmaninoff was one of those who immediately caught on with the audience because of a certain quality of yearning melancholy that takes Tchaikovsky a step further.
I know that there are a lot of people out there who look down at Rachmaninoff, and it's undeserved. I think that, you know, they might maybe misunderstand him, but the fact that he was a genius is undeniable. The fact is that he was a great composer and great pianist is undeniable, and yes, he wrote beautiful melodies, and so people in Hollywood took it over, yes.
Rachmaninoff died of cancer on March 28, 1943. Ironically, he was living in Beverly Hills when he passed on. For having been embraced by Hollywood, he suffered at the merciless hands of critics who unfairly categorized his music as nothing more than background movie fluff. But after all, Rachmaninoff's music came well before the movies.
Maybe the single greatest tragedy in his life was having written the Prelude in C-sharp minor at the age of 20. Nothing that he wrote thereafter was nearly so popular, and people always wanted him to play it as an encore. He hated the piece.
He called his Prelude in C-sharp minor his Frankenstein's monster, but audiences adored its hypnotic, haunting atmosphere.